Welcome to the Live Weekly Update. It's Wednesday, April 29th, 2026. And here we are. For this update, if I'm being completely honest, I'm feeling really quiet, you can probably tell. And I'm sure that has to do with just what a very large, big, full week it's been. So many things have happened. Oh gosh, I forgot my major prop. Maybe I'll have to run off screen and get it at some point. Or maybe I don't. Anyway, big week, huge month. And I think the way I'm going to ground this update is by talking about the fact that we are now at the end of April, which means we have reached the end of the second month of Romancing the Revolution. And you know how excited I was last month by finally putting together some pages? Well, this month, what came together. Look at this. Okay, what came together? Oh god, how am I gonna do this? How do I do this? I don't know. Just more more pages. That's the point. But this packet for April 2026, we're calling it volume 2, is almost, it's like 40 pages again. And it's been a really big journey. So I'm really excited about the fact that I've done it again. My biggest goal for years has been to break through this whatever wall I have, a creative block around making pages. And setting up this container for Romancing the Revolution seems to be giving me the outlet to produce and share things. What I was not anticipating exactly was that in this process of sharing, I would also find and recover and then include pages from years ago that I made. Now, a little timeline check. It was only in 2022 that I found that iPads were useful in my life. My whole life, I'm not loving this curl. Ugh, wow, worse. There, stay. In 2022, I was introduced to iPads, and so I'm a Luddite, and it took me forever. But what a fascinating experience it's been to understand that when you have the right tools, you can do what you want. And so I don't like that either. Wow, my brain is not working today. We are very chaotic. Bring it in. Am I talking about iPads? Jeez, rough start. In 2022, I was introduced to iPads. Thank you to the person who introduced me to them, and that was a helpful tool for me to understand that I could make pages. So, when in the larger scheme of all my work and projects, the fact that pages have come into existence is a relatively recent development. And yet, 2023, 2024, I was making pages. It was the summer of 2025 when even the way of making pages for me sort of shifted in stylistically into a way that felt more free. I guess what I'm realizing now as I'm talking out loud is that there has been this very obvious and important developmental process of even getting to the point of making pages that I'm making right now. Naturally, that's just what happens when we practice, when we're disciplined, when we try things, when we grow, when we learn, when we keep iterating. And I guess that's also to say that to end up with another packet of 40 pages after 2 months of doing Romancing the Revolution, to me, it may not seem like a big deal, but it is, because it's this manifestation or materializing of literally years of writing and attempting and creating that was, to me, felt like it was going nowhere and it wasn't working. So for instance, this is a page. It's one of the first pages I have in Romancing the Revolution Volume 2 from April 2026. But this is a page that I made in June of 2024. Probably maybe this is when I started talking about metaphilosophical performance art and trying to express what that means and why it's a thing. So now I'm 2 years into that, but really living into it, and it's really just amazing to like see the process. I'm always grateful for the documentation that I do. I think that's a note for everybody. Like, it's important for us to document what's going on. That way, not just to keep track of what's happening and like not gaslight ourselves, but I really think that as I keep leaning into like the process of becoming, not just processing the process, but like I feel like now more maybe than ever before in my life, I'm at this place where like my energy and my intention is so clear and solid of like where I want to go and what I want to do, that like I feel like I am actively able to make choices um toward which I want to learn in the way and the direction that I want to grow. Um and in a conversation with someone very recently, they reflected back a very important and valuable framing of that, which is that like to have the choice to do things that are of your choosing truly is like one of the simplest forms of understanding freedom and how to be free, how to use your freedom, how to exercise your freedom. um I'm not going to get into a huge existential lecture right now, but yeah, naturally, like for me it settles into the choices that we make and the ways that we're using our freedom. And it, I don't know, like looking back a couple of years and seeing some of the things that I was writing, like it's really fascinating for me to see how much I've grown and how much even my clarity around what it is that I'm choosing to do has shifted, so that I can choose more boldly, more intentionally, more powerfully. I'm not sure, I'm using a lot of words right now. Anyway, bring it back. Summary point is that I'm thrilled to have had now not just another 40 pages to share. Some of these pages, again, are old and like I pulled them from my process. Like, ooh, this one's from September of 2025. Wow. I don't know, I'm getting caught in the pages. Sorry, I'm like so distractible today. Um, let's talk about what happened. I think I'm still recovering. What is this? What is that? That needs to be fixed. Good thing I cut my own hair so I can be the one to fix that. Immediately after this. Holy hell. I feel like I need to like do a reset. Let's do that. Let's do that. Reset. Here we are. No one's on this live with me right now. It's just me. So this will be on YouTube eventually and real raw processing the process. Here we go. Back in the body, back in the breath. I would like to summarize what's happened in the past month, because the past month has been transformative. That seems like hyperbolic to say, and I don't use the word transformation lightly, but let me use this opportunity to share and document my process of um, of actually reflecting on what has been so special about this past month, and how grateful I am, honestly, for I'm like trying to practice being really grateful for myself in the work that I've been doing, because I'm often feeling like I'm kind of like having to make choices and be bold or push myself in a way that really comes from this like internal space. It has to be like internally motivated. It's my own volition, it's my own will, and sometimes that doesn't make sense to people. So, but like ultimately what we have, like maybe if we're really honest or really strong, then our choices do come from a place that like is of our own making. And I really want to take time to reflect on romance and the revolution, because right now I've got like many concurrent projects running, and they're like the start of 2026 was this like dramatic reset where a lot of things ended, and then suddenly at the beginning of March a lot of things started. One of those projects that started was Romancing the Revolution. It was also the same week that I started this 8-week program working with youth in my community, um, for like a very specialized program that I titled Be Who We Need, the emphasis being on make your voice matter. And the focus for that program has been on like how to ground yourself in a vision, understand your values, recognize your role within a larger collective, and then pursue your creative projects. We've been talking about art, but that can be music, that can be writing, it can honestly be anything. And pursue your own projects from that grounded and informed, connected place so that you can make your voice matter in the work that you do. So if you're tracking that, this is 2 months, 8 weeks of concurrent, simultaneous starting and development to literally now. Today is going to be the last day of that 8 week program. Running parallel where Romancing the Revolution started and happened. Make Your Voice Matter started and is concluding. And then in between there was also For the Love of Strangers. There was also a couple of attempts at the Gadfly. And then just my personal life in general and like different kinds of relationships and communication or community projects and everything else. But like, I'm stunned at what has what has transpired in the past 2 months, and specifically in the past month from the end of Romancing the Revolution last month. Okay, I'm losing myself because my brain's just so scattered right now. But like, the point for today is romancing our vulnerabilities and what that means for the revolution. I'm reflecting on month number 2 of Romancing the Revolution. In general, I've got to say that like my own process and projects have truly just felt like wildly supercharged and catalyzed by everything. There's not a single thing that has like been the inspiration to set things off. There have been critical moments, but it's like this interconnected web, all the influences sort of meshing and gelling, maybe moshing together, that has been just so fruitful and incredibly enriching. So it's weird to say this, but like, honestly, I feel like I have become a slightly different person from the last month when I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to share my pages. This is such a big deal. It was a big deal. And I'm so excited to share these pages, another set of 40. Yes. And there's something else happening here. And that's the part that like is a little bit more, I guess, hard to describe. I'm not going to say it's esoteric because it's not like hidden, but somebody's calling me. I don't like that. Go away. It's not esoteric and it's not exactly hidden, but it's something a little bit more like intangible or hard to describe. So let me first back up and clarify that Romancing the Revolution was a very intentional, deliberate evolution out of the 1.5 year long space that I created and facilitated called Liberation is Local. And I've talked about Liberation is Local before. I've cried on camera about it before in these updates because it was just so profoundly informative for shaping my process. Like, definitely for sure, I am a different person after doing Liberation is Local week after week for like almost 90 weeks. And part of what was so special and powerful about that is that the process of being in conversation week after week with people about liberation, what that looks like, what that requires, prompted different kinds of ideas, different kinds of questions. It clarified something, and it truly was just like this learning process. There's something so important to me about the fact that liberation is like number one in terms of vision, values, goals, hopes, and dreams for the world. That's what I hope for each of us. That's what I hope for the world. And that I know is not like my own thing. I think many of us right now are oriented towards liberation. Many years ago, I was reluctant to use the language of liberation because I didn't want it to get watered down and I didn't want it to be sort of turned into this buzzword that didn't have the depth of understanding to like really make it meaningful and in what we're doing. Like, liberation is not just a word to take lightly. Like, this is something so much more powerfully meaningful and complex for like the sake of humanity, you know? So what was shocking to me was that like I know the significance and the importance of liberation, like if you hold that as the ultimate goal. But I was also really concerned that even for myself, having been oriented towards liberation work for several years, many years, I was like, but what are we actually talking about? do we know? And so I've mentioned this before too, that like I'm really inspired by the fact that love is something that people talk about all the time. We know what love is. We should love each other. We should practice love with ourselves and all this talk about love. But then like what's amiss here? Um do we not know what love actually is? So Bell Hooks writing all about love, incredible contribution for like the collective consciousness and a more like communal large scale understanding of what love actually looks like and requires. Not everybody's read it, you don't have to read it, but I find all about love to be like a really fundamental concrete cornerstone that can be such a useful anchoring reference point for us talking about what love looks and feels like. And I reference it all the time. Now, I riff on Bell Hooks' definition. I'm going to do it in almost every video. As love is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's healing, transformation, and liberation. So liberation then becomes another key word in there, right? And I, thinking about that, was like, what does liberation mean? It was so helpful to have a book spell out in close detail what love is. Thank you, Bell Hooks. And so for the year and a half of doing Liberation is Local, basically the goal was like, what is liberation then? I don't want us to take for granted that we know what that means or that we understand what that looks like. And if we don't understand what it means or what it looks like, then we certainly won't be able to practice it or make it real. So Liberation is Local changed everything for me. I hope one day in my life I will be able to like more comprehensively capture all of the lessons that were gained from being in a space of consistently really talking about liberation. And let me immediately interrupt myself now and say, and none of this is just strictly to be an intellectual exercise. Like, I hope that's so clear. But there is something so important too about being able to get to a place of understanding. This has been top of mind for me for the past week, really, when I was high on my live stream last week. Still haven't posted that video, by the way. And had the like aha epiphany of like something where I was like, the implications of this are so significant. But the implications of what was so significant was this little like light bulb moment that I had around knowing. And I don't want to get lost in my own thoughts right now, but I think a theme that has been coming up for me in the past few weeks as I've been moving through my own process and feeling the differences in how I am moving, much of which is currently inspired by Conversations Romancing the Revolution and in the program that I've been doing with the youth of Making Your Voice Matter. Like my own process over the past 8 weeks, I said I feel like a different person, slightly shifted. And I know that that is coming from a place of like integrated knowing, when the things that we know literally feel differently and allow us to move differently or make choices differently. This is a repeat theme. I'm not trying to be redundant from last week, but it's part of what's coming up. So anyway, Liberation is Local did that for me because it gave me the space to really expand and deepen my understanding of liberation so that I could put it into practice for myself and make my choices differently. And I did. If I were to trace my life from when I started with that space, which was in May of 2024, by the fall of 2024, things were already showing up differently in the way that I was doing my work and like the kind of topics that I was sharing with people, how I was approaching that. And then just to give you, I guess like the proof is here that into 2025, things were shifting externally. The conditions are very dramatically altered into 2025. I'm speaking mostly in a US context of like a political landscape in terms of the federal administration under Trump. And that heightened certain people's fears and sensitivities. It also exacerbated like real policy-based vulnerabilities, and we've just seen like the decimation of so much of what's happened in the past now almost year and a half under this administration. But in those shifting political conditions, I was going back to something that became kind of my go-to reference point after the fall of 2023, what am I doing? Follow my calendar with me. In the fall of 2023, I knew everything had to change. Like, personally and globally, just the flashpoint of, I don't know how you would call that. Some might call it trauma. But I think there was this, or call it like the veil being lifted, or just confronting reality. It really looked to me, when I think of the fall of 2023, all I think about is blood. Maybe I'll post something about that too. I did some writing on it. Again, that's a personal and a global kind of scaling. So after being so confronted with like the degree of pain and violence and darkness, that has always existed, but like I'll just own it for myself. Like my consciousness became more alert to it, and I intentionally tuned in to some of the harshest capacities that I think we as humans are capable of, and stayed there for a really long time. But by making that choice to turn into that, like, attention and focus, I ended the year of 2023 with this, one, a notion of like, everything's changing. Everything has changed. In me, outside, everything's changed. Like, the reality was not the same for me after that. And because of that, then I had a second kind of phrase that stuck with me, which was that to always be responsive and stay responsive to what's happening. So, hence, now 2024 started Liberation is Local because I knew I needed to be in a space of a deeper, more tailored and focused kind of learning. I needed that, and that's what I wanted to be able to provide for others. The conditions around me were beckoning that. Then going into 2025, similarly, I was like, everything's going to be different now again, and I'm going to be responsive to the conditions. As the conditions around me shifted and my internal conditions also morphed, then I started creating differently. This is like a long-winded way to get to like, all of that though has landed me in now Romancing the Revolution. And this is why. Romancing the Revolution is like a second space out of Liberation is Local. In many ways, it's similar. We're taking the insights that were gained in Liberation is Local and like putting it more into practice. Me personally, I can speak just for myself. This is also the practice of getting more free for me. Romancing the Revolution is about that, and it's not just to be catchy phrasing. It's to give space and like name the sort of loving, committed, devotional approach to really tending to the revolution that is also part of like our internal will and where we are situated in the larger scheme of things. But it's also about romancing the revolution on a much larger scale, not just on the individual level. So like how to be in that relationship is the whole point of romancing the revolution. Now, I think that what is really special about this space, that's different from the other spaces that I make, is that this is for a kind of dialogue that really is like so nourishing. It's reminiscent of what Liberation is Local was, but slightly different because we're doing it online. It's a smaller group than it was, but there's room for it to continue evolving and growing. I think that after doing this second month, which ended up being focused on vulnerability, no surprises there because it's been vulnerability for weeks. And I want to talk a little bit about the content that came through in the pages. But after going through this past month, going through the conversations, going through life, putting together these pages, I'm anticipating something for Romancing the Revolution, which is, you know, its own new trajectory, becoming like a little bit more clear. So I guess I'm saying this because I just want to like, again, like I started document the process, but also name that like if we can choose the directions of our own growth and learning, or we can willfully choose the areas of our own life that we want to nurture and develop, um, I think that that is its own slight, subtle shift of being able to step more into our freedom and our power. I'll explain what I mean like this. I've never been a fan of the sort of meaning making of life to say, well, when bad things happen, at least we learn from it. Or like, we went through this thing and we learned for it. I mean, people will say that about like relationships. Like, what did you learn from your relationship? Yeah, you can go through a shitty, terrible relationship. At least you maybe learn something from it. It's a very silver lining approach to things, but there's so much that happens like in our kind of cultural framing of learning happens retrospectively. Hindsight is 2020, that kind of thing. And I guess what I'm trying to touch on right now is that myself right now in this moment, I'm really feeling so much more like creatively bold and courageous and personally like at ease because I know there's so much for me to continue learning. And there are areas that I definitely want to continue growing in that will make me a better person, that will make me a healthier person, all these things. But the reason to do it is not because I feel like I'm lacking or I have some sort of deficit that isn't good enough. The reason I want to move in certain directions, what is the name of this like feeling or how to explain the motivation for this? Um it's actually like a desire. Like I really want to go in this path. I really want to go in this direction. Oh my gosh, hold on. I think I have a page for this. Let me see. I maybe talked about this before on a different live, but that was forever ago. So let's just see if I can get into it. I know that this came up in one of the pages that I made that I did share last winter when I was doing Liberation is Local, because I was also working on a set of pages for the way that I frame working relationships. Play on words as usual. But the working relationships was explicitly like focusing on working relationships in a professional dynamic, though I am also very explicit, like personal, political, philosophical, professional are all interrelated. Anyway, here's the page that I'm thinking of. This page with this lovely little rainbow arc here was, maybe we'll go through this page again. Should we do it? I know where I'm going, but let me give you a little bit of orientation here. The top of this page talks about change, transformation, learning, and becoming. Everything is a process. No one is perfect. Doing the work necessitates engaging our will and effort to create new spaces, conditions, and systems and ways of being with others. Yes, 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 yes. Sure. I wasn't planning on reading this page, so I'm just like skimming it right now to see what's going on. But why this came to mind for me in this particular page is that I say, yeah, ideally we move together more easily with those who share our values, assumptions, goals, visions, and desires around the projects we pursue. And then we do that together. But doing anything new to us, demands a willingness and an openness to be constantly learning. This doesn't just happen, it still requires practice. We have to be and do it together with others, yes, and develop something we can really trust over time. And then this is the part I'm getting at. There's this little corner here on the page where I know maybe a sentiment that comes up that's like, I want to know if I'm going in the right direction. So when we're in this process of development and learning, transformation and becoming, literally by definition, we are learning something that we do not know yet, something that is new to us. We are kind of at that threshold, the edge of our knowing and being. So going into something new, it makes sense that we would want to know if we're going in the right direction. And so back in December when I created this page and we had the first conversation about it, I sort of ended with this prompt of pay attention to the sort of questions that emerge. Are the questions those that keep you stuck and stagnant? Or are they questions that helpfully illuminate a way to continue moving toward the answers you want to know? That's kind of a mouthful, but there's a way of saying, like, am I going in the right direction? Pay attention to the questions that emerge in the process. And some of the questions might be like, you know, why are we doing this? Will this ever work? What's the point? And those might be the ones that get us like stuck and stagnant. I'm sure there are plenty of other examples of questions that could come up. But there are other questions that maybe can helpfully illuminate the direction that move you toward answers that you want to know. And that's where I'm at right now. Which is very cool, like, because when back in December when I made that page, I don't think I would have anticipated me being here at the very end of April, um, facing my own questions and opportunities to, like, say, "What answers do I want to find out? Which questions do I want to ask?" Even though this is kind of a weird quirk of mine, I find the 3rd Men in Black to be a very insightful film. And Kay in that film, the character Kay, Agent Kay, has this piece of like wisdom for a young Agent J that is don't ask the questions you don't want to know the answer to. And yeah, that there might be some strategy and avoidance, just don't ask, don't tell kind of thing. However, for me, I was like, I like it better if we frame it in a positive, obviously, a positive connotation and say, ask the questions you want to know the answer to. And sometimes maybe we have to get really okay with the hard, gritty, nasty truths and be willing to face the truth. But if we want the truth, then we can figure out which questions we actually truly want to know the answers to. So there's a little bit of like maybe preparatory constitution building to get ready for the truth too. You want the truth, you can't handle the truth. Get ready to handle the truth, and then you can ask the questions that you really want to know the answers to. I think that like characterizes this like spirit of experimentation, of being open to not knowing what will happen or being friendly and comfortable with kind of broaching the unknown. But I hope you can see, I don't know, is this making sense? I hope it is coming through that like what I'm trying to say is that there's a different kind of energetic and even like affective orientation to being able to ask a question you want to know the answer to. It's to me so fundamentally different from like this retroactive hindsight is 2020. I learned from something that happened versus like this really enthusiastic and like um almost earnest way of wanting to learn and wanting to go in that direction. To me, maybe there's something there about like freedom and choice in terms of pursuing knowledge or knowing in a way that is like, what kind of world do you want? Wow, that's a great idea. Epiphanies are happening right now. So much of the language that I use to frame my work and ground myself is like, what kind of world do you want to live in? What kind of future? What kind of communities do we want to build? And like, let's go in that direction. As a inspired epistemologist, this might be the question of like, and what do you want to know? What do you want to learn? Which questions are you excited to ask? And then would flounder in the inherently messy and unpredictable process of learning, but which questions would you happily flounder in along the way to get to a new place of understanding? Maybe the happy floundering is like a great way to describe what I feel like I'm up to these days. Just I'm asking these questions of myself and I'm like, I want to go in this direction. And whatever learning happens along the way, that's what I want to do. Maybe this is like the healthiest way to also approach relationships, to bring it back to like working relationships. If you're going to be in the relationship, might as well learn with a spirit of excitement, like, oh, a spirit of willingness and wanting, like the the want to know is not supposed to be this tongue-in-cheek recognition of like the lack, like you are want of much things because you don't have it, but more the want to know from a place of like really spirited desire. So anyway, more on the wordplay that's always happening in all of my titles of things. So okay, move toward the answers you want to know, to really use the questions that emerge as like a kind of guidepost to track whether or not you're on the right track. I have a lot of questions these days, but I do think that I'm on the right track because the questions that I'm asking of myself and of others are really interesting and fruitful and like exciting questions. Like, what happens if I do this? Not why is this not working, or what's the problem getting in the way. Those can be important questions too for like problem solving, yes. But like when you're setting a direction, there's a different kind of question, like what's possible? What could that look like? Um, how can I show up in a way to make that more likely? What can I learn to do differently that will move me in the direction that I want to go? I don't know, maybe this is like the most basic review of something very trite. Like, that's a growth mindset, Cori, not a revelation. But I will say that doing these pages, I'm going to go back to the pages of Romance and the Revolution, why this was so helpful and where Romance and the Revolution is going. Start with pages, then we'll go that direction. In these pages, what I was surprised about was that the, vulnerability became the major theme carrying over from last month. And I guess sort of naturally because of that, I also ended up being more vulnerable in the sharing of the pages, since I'm finding older pages from years past or over time that I had never shared. I decided to include those in this packet. I'm not going to assume that everybody reads them, so maybe it's not that vulnerable after all. But like, for instance, there was a time when I was working with my therapist, because I've said so many times before, like I've specifically been in a very like focused process of trying to unpack my own shit so that I can show up for my work the way that I want to. And this has been a 2-year process. So in the midst of that process, I had this thought of like, well, if I want to write my pages and I'm having a hard time sharing my pages, or I don't know how to be honest in a way that like really captures what I'm trying to convey, and that's impeding my writing process, why don't I just get into a practice of trying to write without any inhibition, but knowing that I'll share these pages with my therapist. So there's like an audience of one built in. I tried doing that a couple of times, made some pages, wrote some stuff, really let it out there, since I was like, my therapist is going to see this. The whole point is to be like open and honest with your therapist. And then I didn't share them with my therapist, but instead I added them to this packet of now publicly available pages. So anyway, I got vulnerable in the process of doing these pages and sharing them too. Part of what became vulnerable is that in talking about the work that I want to do, and how I've been approaching work or moving through transitions of, making a choice and then committing yourself to like become that person. That process of like an inherent transitional phase of becoming, to me, ended up prompting me to write some personal things about like relationships and partnerships and the kind of people I want to be with. And so now that's included in these pages too, which I think is like a really good and obvious reason for why the working relationships, like in a more professional setting of how to work with people, and do work together, came through towards the end of this packet. And then right there smack in the middle was like a few pages from Make Your Voice Matter, this 8-week program that inspired all of this, because I'm like, well, I made this 8-week program for youth to encourage them to be able to do their work from a place of like tapping into their own power. But teaching and learning, are kind of simultaneously present with one another always. That's why I love teaching. I love learning. And so I learned a lot in this process too. So it was like a great weekly space for me to be in my own place of reminding myself of like what I need to do my work as well. I'm just showing like, this is one of the pages that kind of maps out the process for how we did Make Your Voice Matter, starting with like grounding in visions of liberation, and then learning how to read and write the world critically, getting in touch with your feelings, and then knowing that you're in a part of a much larger collective effort, and then what are you going to do about it to make your voice matter as part of a movement. So it's so fun to be able to like I don't know, learn and grow and do work in the process myself, but doing this with other people is so invaluable. Like, it has to be done with others. So I did a lot in this packet about writing. This is one of my favorite excerpts from Gloria Anzaldúa that has been an inspiration for me for decades. And then this is something like a brain dump free write that I did back in 2023 about like how I want to write and why I struggle at it. So real raw stuff comes through in this, but all of that is also to kind of capture the process itself, right? Like, that's a real honest moment that happened, and I like to be able to see the trajectory of how things have evolved for me over the years. This is just a cutie that I drew. This is a self-portrait from the weekly update I did on April 10th, where I was like awkwardly sitting for like 2 minutes waiting to be cued in, and it was rolling. We are on camera. But this is talking about vulnerability. I really liked that live stream. Just gonna put it out there. Part of documenting the process too. And then these are some of the pages that I made for my therapist. Vulnerability, authenticity, and intimacy. In the middle is truth as a relationship. This also was a page for my therapist. I'm not gonna go through the whole thing, but talking about like, how do I do my work? Situating myself publicly to be able to do that requires working through some shit that might get in the way, including like core wounds or attachment, however you approach therapy, whatever lens or scaffolding helps you make sense of it. And then like intimate personal relationships in my own life too. And like, this is raw. This was from my therapist, not intended for a public audience, but look at me go. Look at me go. One of my favorite things, I am going to share this because I included this too. This is a page I made in October of 2025 for my therapist, intended only for her eyes. And, you know, so much of my therapeutic objective in the past 2 years has been getting to a place of being able to share work more publicly, including writing the way that I want to write about the things that I want to write about. And naturally, we've done a lot around, like, we've done, what is that? There's something in here that I don't understand where it is, but we've done a lot of work about like partnerships and dating and intimate relationships too. This is an insightful question, thinking about where I'm going for my work. This question here is like so perfectly suited for me personally, because it's just who and how I am. I wrote, what if my relationships are my work? Instead of just this trite old phrase, relationships are work. You might be like, that's a weird thing to say. What if my relationships are my work? But then I wrote, how does this reframe change the way I live and move through each day, every year? For me personally, I find that question to be a helpful question to guide me in, because what if my relationships are my work? Hello? Everything I'm talking about is an epistemology of intimacy. That happens in relationship. Of course, my relationships are going to be how I do my work. Even parasocial relationships are going to be central to the way that I do my work. So in this page, I wrote a little bit about like hangups around writing. But what I really love about this page in particular is that I was reflecting on, do I have it here? I don't think so. I was reflecting on Bell Hooks in her book, Wounds of Passion, which is about her writing life. And it was a book that kind of stumbled into my life. I probably talked about it at some point since I did this in October. Anyway, some of the quotes that I pulled from this, I'm going to share with you. We know Bell Hooks from All About Love. We know Bell Hooks from a million other projects. Literally, I'm surrounded by Bell Hooks right now. I just have I can look at like 7 books right now. Just not the Wounds of Passion. That one's in my bedroom. Anyway, we know Bell Hooks from her writing so much, but this was a beautiful, for me, really serendipitous and like important stumble upon to find the Wounds of Passion and get that into my life, because she's talking about writing herself, like her own experience with writing, but mostly the relationships that informed her work too. And so she speaks really candidly about one relationship in particular that was very significant for getting her to write. And I'm going to read some of these quotes that I pulled from it. So she wrote, it's true that lots of times when I could have been doing other things, I was preoccupied with the mess this relationship was in, but I was part of that mess. and it was my job as well as his to clean it up. And then this is something that stuck with me. I'm going to read from this little block here. She wrote, I can't tell anyone how afraid I feel. Sometimes there is this voice inside that whispers to me, you are going to go mad. You know, if you leave him, you won't be able to hold it together. Sometimes even that voice says, you'll die. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of not becoming the writer I want to be. I think I have shared this quote before on a live stream, but now that this page has found its way into this little packet for Romancing the Revolution, I guess that all of this is just to say, or like showcase once more, that the writing and the work and the relationships and the ways that we challenge ourselves or face ourselves to be who we want to be and become who we are is like really the work. This, I don't know. I I'm surprised that I put this stuff into the Romance and the Revolution, but I guess that's kind of the point. To share a lot of the vulnerability of my own process too. So I'm gonna put this away so I stop getting distracted. And now I want to talk about where I think Romance and Revolution is going, or where I want it to go. Now that I'm 2 months in, now that I'm 80 pages in, with 2 volumes from 2 months, I'm gonna keep going. This is, maybe it doesn't seem like it's very coherent. Apologies for the chaos of my mind today. But where I see Romancing the Revolution going is in what follows. There was so much that was covered in Liberation is Local over a year and a half. I have 90 weeks worth of pages. Some of those have been included, some of those I've talked about here. The pages went through their own evolution of changing stylistically what they look like and kind of how I made them over that year and a half, which has kind of led into what they are today. So I wasn't ever in a place where I really felt like comfortable just compiling every page from Liberation is Local and being like, here's the Liberation is Local packet. But I do want to recapture some of the content and the learning that happened in that weekly space because it was just so powerful. I think it deserves that, and I want to be able to do like my own, I want to be able to serve, like do justice to my own learning. And one of my key mottos is share what you learn. So I also want to put it in a way that can be shareable for other people to be able to like do that thinking about like, what does liberation look and feel like? What does it mean for us to be able to practice certain actions and choices and behaviors to allow us to get more free and become more liberated, or as the phrasing of that space goes, move with love from a place of liberation, even and especially in these conditions. So I have a feeling that maybe in the next month or so, I am going to focus back in on what liberation looks and feels like, to be able to give more language to the feeling of being able to choose freely what we do and how we do our work. And then after that, I think that I'm going to, I hope, I aspire, I want. I want to use this space to really push myself and create the pages that share more of my philosophy. I've been just joyfully pointing to all of these things that have been coming up over the past week of like aha moments and epiphanies and big bold ideas and proposals and projects and like my biggest work yet, and what that looks like. Finally, I've said it before, but I'm gonna say it again and commit it to words, that I really want to share what I actually think and what I actually have to say. And so I think that I'll start with maybe focusing on liberation, and what that is to give a grounding, continue like setting the foundation through these pages. But then after that, I hope, I want, I will to create pages that really, for my experience of Romancing the Revolution, nurture that side of me that is like my most, I think, valuable and unique contribution that I can make, into sharing what I've learned by being in my work the way that I have for decades. So I'm saying it because, put it out there, let it happen. So it will be, hopefully. And I have to just like, again, I'm coming from this place and energy of just being so deeply grateful for having the opportunity and for having the conditions, and then to myself too for being so committed to this process of showing up and learning that like this is a place to learn for me. It's a place to grow and develop, and I really 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 invite anybody who is also interested in being in this wildly nourishing space to join. It's not a pitch. I'm clearly not a business person. I'm so bad at marketing and being a business person. But if you are a person who really wants to be in like some kind of rhythm with others in your own learning, I think that this is a good place to do that. And I would love to have more people involved. There's this beautiful synergy that happens when like-minded people with aligned values get together and consistently share and learn and connect. So that's the invitation. Romancing the Revolution, again, is like a monthly space. So I'm chopping it up into monthly like experiences. So we will start anew in May. And the registration for it right now is you can get in for as little as $10 if you're a $5 a month member. So $15 for 5 weeks of this learning space and discussion with others is what's on the table if you want it. Anyway, you can also get my pages too. I'm just going to share that. All of my pages right now are available for download on my Buy Me a Coffee page. It's buymeacoffee.com/Cori Wong. And they're in the shop. And I don't know what it would look like to just like stumble through them and flip through them because there's 40 pages without having the attending conversations. But you for sure would get something in terms of, if nothing else, insight into many of my pages as they've been developing over the years and along the way. And like, yeah, this volume 2 is vulnerability in the work of our relationships. I don't know. Okay. I think that's what I'm going to end on. This week I'm in so deep of this like really bold project proposal. I'm not ready to talk about it super publicly in detail yet, but I am very committed right now to this idea that I am trying to bring into fruition, which is kind of like asking the questions you want to know the answer to. It's sort of like giving a prompt to indicate the direction that I want to move in. Like I want to go over there. So I'm deep in some work right now to try to plant seeds that could grow that way. All right, that's it. That's what I'm doing. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining. Thanks for the process and your support along the way. Maybe I'll do this again next week. We'll see. But I hope you're well and you're learning too, and that you're getting something out of it. But anyway, thanks. See you soon. Bye.